Here is the English translation of the content you provided, without numbers or titles. On a November afternoon in 1940, a drizzling rain fell over Manhattan, New York. A gentleman with a gaunt face and deep, profound eyes, dressed in a Republican-era style, slowly walked into the cloakroom of the Sherry Netherland Hotel. He quietly sat down on a chair, took a pistol from his pocket, and aimed it at his right ear. With a bang, the king of speculators, who had once made all of Wall Street tremble, ended his life full of destiny. Tonight, let us accompany the gently flickering flames in the fireplace, and this story you don't need to remember, as we walk through his true life. His name was Jesse Livermore, the greatest short seller in the history of Wall Street. In that era filled with speculation and frenzy, he went bankrupt 4 times and miraculously rose from the ashes 4 times. At the beginning of the Great Depression in 1929, when everyone was plunged into the despair of ruin, he made a fortune of $100 million by shorting the market. That was a staggering amount of wealth, enough to buy several small countries at the time, earning him the title, the Lone Wolf of Wall Street. Yet, this genius, who understood every pulse of the market and held the ultimate code to wealth, ultimately chose a bullet as the finale to his life. In the suicide note he left for his wife, he wrote these words, "My life has been a failure. This is a relief for me." Why did the pinnacle of wealth not bring him lasting peace, but instead push him into an abyss of irresolvable emptiness and loneliness? The night is long tonight. Let us set aside all worldly distractions and, in this low, slow narrative, touch the soul of that man who struggled in solitude a century ago. Let us turn the hands of time back to that blood-red autumn of 1929. On October 24th, the New York Stock Exchange experienced the most devastating crash in its history, with countless people's assets vanishing into thin air within hours. The streets were filled with desperate cries, bankers' faces were ashen, and some even leaped to their deaths from the high buildings of Wall Street. But at that moment, in a secluded mansion on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, Jesse Livermore sat quietly before a massive mahogany desk. His face was gaunt, a half-smoked cigar resting between his fingers, his silver-white hair making him look particularly cold and stern under the dim wall lamp. The blackboard in front of him was densely covered in numbers. It was the culmination of a century-defining short position he had meticulously laid out for months. While all of America was buying into the illusion of prosperity like mad, he alone, like a lone wolf lurking in the dark night, had smelled the stench of rotting in the air. That day, his wife cried her heart out at home, because newspapers were full of rumors that Livermore had gone completely bankrupt, and an enraged mob of stockholders was ready to tear him apart. When Jesse Livermore wearily pushed open the door of his home late at night, his wife screamed and hugged him, thinking they would end up on the streets. Livermore gently patted his wife's back and said in an extremely calm, almost emotionless voice, "Darling, we are not bankrupt." He slowly pulled a stack of statements from his coat pocket and softly added, "Today, I just made the most money of my life. $100 million. His wife was speechless with shock, but there was no trace of a victor's joy on Livermore's face, only endless emptiness in his eyes. He turned and looked out the window at the darkness-devoured New York City. The silence of that moment was more suffocating than the exchange floor during the day. He suddenly realized that although he had beaten the market, he had become the enemy of the entire system. Every dollar he earned was stained with the tears of losers. This extreme loneliness of standing against everyone began to gnaw at his heart day and night, like a heavy suit of iron armor he could not take off. He wrote in his diary, "When you win a victory in the market that makes everyone else cry, you don't get happiness, only deeper fear." This loneliness and his keen sense of the market were not accidents, but rooted in his childhood flight and struggle. Let's rewind time another 40 years. On a barren farm in New England, a thin, 14-year-old boy was hoeing the ground under the scorching sun. His father was a strict and stubborn farmer who thought reading was useless and that the only path in life was to sweat on this land until death. His father had planned his life for him, marry a farm girl in a few years, and then toil like an ox or horse until the end. But there was no surrender in the boy's eyes, only a longing for distant places and numbers. Late at night, by the faint light of a kerosene lamp, he would quietly work out math problems from his textbooks. One moonless, deep night, 14-year-old Jesse Livermore secretly packed his only change of clothes and, with his mother's tearful, silent consent, ran away from home. With the only $5 his mother had given him in his pocket, he got onto a rickety carriage bound for Boston. When he first saw the bustling streets and towering buildings of Boston, his blood was set ablaze with a burning desire for the unknown world. He found a job at a stock brokerage firm called Payne Weber, where his duty was to copy the constantly changing stock prices onto a large blackboard. It was a physically demanding job requiring intense focus, endless numbers streaming past the boy's eyes like a tide. Others found it only dull and tedious, but Jesse Livermore saw a strange, living rhythm in those cold numbers. He discovered that these numbers didn't appear randomly, they hid the greed, fear, hope, and despair of humanity. He started carrying a small notebook, recording the daily price fluctuations and his own predictions, running countless simulated trades through his mind. At 15, encouraged by a friend, he used the few dollars he had saved for his first real buy and sell, making $3 in profit. That day, an unquenchable ambition was born in the boy's heart. He understood that he was never meant for the land, but for this world of numbers and games. But what he didn't know then was that this almost pathological obsession with numbers, while granting him untold wealth, would also quietly sever his connection to the warmth of the real world. At the beginning of the 20th century, Wall Street was a lawless, blood-soaked primordial jungle. The young Jesse Livermore quickly made a name for himself. Because he was so consistently successful in the underground bucket shops, winning too much of their money, all the Boston shops blacklisted him. He was forced to take his $2,000 principal and venture alone into the true heart of finance, Wall Street in New York. He was in his prime then, with a gaunt face, a sharp suit, and a habit of never partnering with anyone, which made him seem out of place amidst the noise. During the stock market panic of 1907, Wall Street was paralyzed. Capital dried up, credit completely locked down. At that moment, Livermore once again showed his instinct as a predator. He used all his leverage to frantically short the entire market. That day, the legendary financial titan J.P. Morgan had to send someone to beg him, asking the young short seller to stop his attack and give the market a lifeline. Livermore displayed a chilling restraint in the face of immense fame and fortune. He accepted the request, closing his positions in batches at the bottom and starting to buy. In just one day, he not only saved the market but also made $3 million for himself. He was only 30 years old that year. He began buying luxury yachts and properties in the most expensive neighborhoods of Manhattan, surrounded by countless sycophantic businessmen and socialites. However, the direction of the market is harder to predict than a woman's heart, and extreme confidence is often the beginning of destruction. Just a few years later, in a cotton futures trade, Livermore violated the trading principles he had painstakingly created for himself and blindly followed the inside tip of a so-called expert. That campaign brought him the first devastating blow of his life. Within a few months, millions in wealth had vanished, and he was millions of dollars in debt. In 1915, he was forced to declare bankruptcy, going from a fabulously wealthy mogul to a debtor everyone avoided. Friends left him one by one, his former mansion was auctioned off, and the knocking of creditors